Noah Lukeman, in his book The First 5 Pages, A Writer's Guide to Staying Out of the Rejection Pile, states that, "Personally, I am always more impressed by simplicity, clarity. It is the mark of a writer who knows his subject well and is secure enough not to lay it on in the telling. Aim for complexity of thought, not expression." Hi, I'm Hamish Black, and welcome to Writing on Games. Indeed, it is this idea of aiming for complexity of thought rather than of expression, among many other things, that has made The Witness one of the most intriguing games I have experienced in a long time. Its means of expression are absolutely simple. Explore an island, look for puzzles, draw lines to solve puzzles. However, much like I mentioned in my video on her story, there exists an almost Brechtian sense of alienation through the shift in player focus from the ontological, or questions of meaning, how do I get from the start to the end of this maze, to the epistemological, or questions of being. Why am I on this island with mazes strewed everywhere, and also who am I? Through this, it achieves its complexity of thought, or at the very least intrigues the player enough to give the illusion of complexity. You see, in one particular review of The Witness I watched by Zam.com's Heather Alexandra, whilst she predominantly praised the game, she states that she hopes people see the game's insidious side. This game is a terrible contradiction, as she puts it. And whilst I believe that her point is perfectly valid, I don't believe that this should be regarded as a negative in this case. Or rather, one should consider the insidious contradictions that permeate the game to be at the heart of almost every design decision in the game. As the numerous audio logs and footage that you can unlock suggest, it's a game that states with the conviction and authority of an artist that authorial intent is a joke. As James Burke states in one of the many quotes you can uncover in the game, at best, the products of human emotion are interpretations of the world that tell you more about the guy who's talking than about the world he's talking about. Second-hand views of the world, made third-hand by your interpretation of them. The game frames itself as an art house game of sorts, constantly hinting to the player through the island and how the puzzles are presented that there is far more to this world than meets the eye, and that there is always the possibility of finding out more about the human condition right around the next corner, while simultaneously stating outright to the player that this vision is entirely singular. That is to say, it is entirely that of Jonathan Blow. Now that may seem reductive, as obviously a team of people worked on this game, but it's hard to deny his auteurship over the game. It's a game that at once tries to convince the player of the depth of this world, whilst paradoxically mocking them for reading into it too much like I might be doing here. What might seem strange then, and what I want to focus on today, is the idea that it is at once this seemingly deliberate, insidious experience, whilst also being one of the most open-ended, accommodating examples of humane design in a game I have ever come across. One of the key elements that allows me to make this distinction between The Witness and other games is that we have come to view modern video games of all kinds with a kind of immediacy. The Witness, as I will attempt to break down in this video, rejects that notion wholeheartedly, both in and out of the game, and as a result is more able to confidently assert its own quality as a game than perhaps any game I have played in recent years. Before we go any further, it is important to analyse this idea of the immediacy of modern gaming, before exploring how The Witness upheaves this. When one considers the concept of immediacy in modern games, what comes to mind? For me anyway, I initially think of the popcorn action movie style campaigns of games like Call of Duty, where the campaigns last for a few hours and focus on bombarding the player with as much visual information as possible in the fight to keep their constantly waning attention long enough that you can realistically call your game a success. Indeed, the statistics would seem to bear out the idea that the player's attention spans are becoming shorter and shorter. In an age where PC gaming has become something of a dominant platform, where games are cheaper and there exists a constant influx of new games every day, all grasping for the player's attention, as well as the constant distractions and pressing concerns of everyday life occurring at all times, players simply aren't finishing games. Back in 2014, Steam statistics revealed that only 56% of people completed the massive RPG that is Mass Effect 2. Perhaps more surprising though, only 47% of people had completed Portal, one of the most critically acclaimed games of all time, and crucially, one that only takes on average a few hours to beat. Move things forward a couple of years, and you have the release of The Witness. This is a game that Jonathan Blow stated pre-release would last 70 hours, accompanied by the seemingly hyperbolic statement that the game contained no repetition or filler. How could a release like this possibly be justified when people seemingly can't be bothered putting in the effort to complete a 3-hour game like Portal? Well, seemingly, The Witness has bucked this trend, with reports stating that the game generated $5 million in sales in its first week alone. It has received almost universal acclaim from critics, with many perfect or near-perfect scores from several well-known outlets. Clearly an appetite exists for this kind of grand experience, and it would seem, judging by the general reaction to the game, that it actually has been successful in achieving its lofty claims of tens of hours of gameplay without ever repeating itself, all whilst presenting its entire interface to the player as a series of aesthetically simple, although functionally anything but, line puzzles. The question is, how has it managed to subvert what appear to be reliable statistics and emerge a success both critically and commercially? The first thing I would say is that crucially, it does not mistake a short experience for a concise one. I have clocked around 25 hours in the game, seen the ending, or rather the end game, and I still feel like the game is nowhere near outstaying its welcome. Not only do you not need to complete all the areas in order to see the end game, but the way you look at the environment outside of the puzzle panels essentially creates another game within the Witness. Through its simplicity of expression, that being the line puzzles, it conveys more information than most games convey in however many exposition dumps. That is the very definition of conciseness. A game like Portal does the same thing, communicating most of its information regarding the world through the environment, allowing the player to take in as much or as little as they feel like. On the other side, a game like Call of Duty, despite how short it is, often feels like its massive variety of explosive set pieces exists simply to pad out its wafer-thin narrative. Conciseness does not mean short, and The Witness exists as perhaps the keenest example of this in recent years. With that in mind, the second and most important reason I believe this game has subverted what the industry believes to be the limited attention span of players, and what makes it an example of so-called humane design that I mentioned earlier, is the fact that the game actively encourages the player to put the game down. Again, like the dual nature of almost every mechanic, design and narrative decision in the game, The Witness is a game that on the one hand demands the player's total and undivided concentration, and on the other hand actively encourages the player to take breaks and stop playing. The majority of your time in The Witness, and why I can't imagine anyone wanting to watch a stream of this game, will be spent staring at a static image of a maze, banging your head against the proverbial brick wall, occasionally drawing a line and inevitably failing trying to figure out that one new rule or weird mechanic that makes an initially simple puzzle seem almost impossible. Thankfully, the game opts for a completely open world design, whereby any puzzle or set of puzzles can be examined and attempted at any time. The game gracefully nurtures this sense of quiet persistence in the player by making each puzzle a multi-part process. The first part of the puzzle tries to instill in the player a sense of what rule set this particular set of puzzles is following by introducing one or two new symbols or concepts. And then the second part involves the mechanics of actually solving the puzzle with your newfound knowledge. The beauty of this, and why it encourages persistence from the player, where they might be inclined to look up a guide in other games, is that simply checking a solution to the puzzle at hand only solves the second part of the puzzle, the mechanics. It completely skips over the studious scientific rigour of hypothesizing, experimenting, and using the process of elimination in order to figure out what a symbol does. The corollary, in this instance, would be using hacks in Dark Souls to skip straight to the Ornstein and Smough fight. Without first learning the rules regarding the animations, item management, and combat, there is no way you could beat this fight. In The Witness, as you begin to explore more and more puzzles, you start to find recurring symbols that the game was initially trying to teach you before. If the player has just looked up the answer without thinking about why that is the answer, then they will be required to go back, lest they end up in a constant loop of getting stuck at problems and looking up the answers, essentially rendering their experience with the game totally non-valuable. What the open world does in this case is not only allow the player to walk away from a puzzle that is causing them difficulties, but encourages it. This idea has expanded to Jonathan Blow taking to Twitter to literally encourage people to stop playing the game for a period of time so that they might clear their heads. This was perhaps my biggest revelation playing The Witness. So many games nowadays, regardless of whether they are AAA shooters or comparatively slow indie games, have become like a race to the finish line. We live in a culture so dominated by fear of spoilers, and as previously stated, so many games exist and are vying for the player's time, that it's often tempting to just race through as much of the game as you possibly can, so that you can either say you've completed it or you've experienced it in some way, before tossing it to one side and moving on to the next game in which the same thing will happen. By rejecting the need to pander to the player's constantly fluctuating focus in terms of what games they are going to play, The Witness confidently asserts its spectacular level of quality. It knows you will be back. Jonathan Blow is in your goddamn head. Of course you can't look away for too long. It was such a massive revelation to me precisely because of the fact that never before have I experienced a game encouraging me, nor a developer straight up telling me to stop playing. It made me realise just how timid modern gaming comes across, despite its often explosive and bombastic surface. Every game released today does so with the inherent knowledge that the first few days of release are going to see the peak number of players, and so the emphasis is on keeping those players entertained as much as possible in that short space of time, that they don't take to social media to complain that the game wasn't long enough or didn't have a single player campaign or whatever. The Witness is a game that is so sure of itself. It tells you to put the controller down and walk away. It knows you'll be back. That confidence in rejecting so many tropes of modern gaming, player retention, design and mechanics, and everything else in the game is what makes it so special to me. And I, for one, would like to see more games boast this level of quality with the degree of confidence that The Witness does. Now, with all of that said, I'm Hamish Black, and this has been Writing on Games. Thanks very much for watching, and go and play The Witness. I'll see you next time.